Hello, this is Dr. Don White, and this is the second of 3 podcasts on using the IASA Senate Bill 7 Performance Rankings file. The first podcast provided a general overview of the file structure. The second podcast, this one, is intended to give you directions on how to transition data from a previous version of the file into the latest version. The third podcast will be an overview of how to use the optional Microsoft Word Merge notification letter. I encourage you to watch the first podcast to gain the overview and the structure of the newest file. I will be using 2 files for this podcast. I have a blank version of the most recent file, and I also have a sample file from last year's version of the file. The first thing I want to do is click on Enter District Info here to determine the data that I hope to move into this file. So I'm looking for district and school locations, position title, a list of license endorsements, and the list of content endorsements, and then any local qualifications. Now moving on to the file from last year, if I've already entered that data, I can transition it into the new file. For example, I've listed all of the positions already in the previous file from last year. So what I'm going to do is highlight all of the data or the list and then copy that and move it over to the new file. So I highlighted the list of positions, I right-click, click on Copy, and then go to the new file, find where I hope to paste that, and I right-click on the exact cell that I want to paste that data starting in, and then I move to values. I want to paste values. Doing the typical copy and paste process may cause a problem with the program in that it may corrupt some of the formulas that you can't see behind the scenes. So it's important that you paste values. So I select that as paste values. Another way of doing this would be to go to the top and click the drop down arrow for paste, and then going to paste values here. So I've copied that information into position title. Now I need to see if I have any district school locations, and I can move back to the original file. I happen to have the Enter Schools Here worksheet, so I can grab that information, highlight the schools. I'm going to right-click, click on Copy, go back to the new file, right-click where I want that information to be, and click Values. I also want to make sure and determine if I have any license endorsements. So I'm going to go back to the previous version of the file, click on Enter Positions here, and I do happen to have endorsements that were entered into the file. So I'm going to select those, the entire list, right-click, click Copy, move back to the file, and you'll notice that there is a long list already populated. This is a compilation of license endorsements that I've collected from several Illinois State Board of Education documents. So it's a long list, but I still want to include the list that I've created. So I can right-click at the bottom where I want that to be, and then click Paste Values. Now in some cases, people may want this sorted alphabetically. You'll notice that this isn't alphabetical. So I can do that by each of these lists independently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the entire list, and then once I've done that, I'm going to click on Data at the top, then click on Sort. I get a message that tells me that I don't have permission to sort the columns next to this. That's okay because some of these cells are locked. And it says, do you wish to continue? And I say yes. Then it tells me that it's going to sort by column E. That's the column I'm in, and so that's perfect. I'm going to click OK. And then the list ends up sorted alphabetically with my list included, my items included in the list. Then I would go to the list of content-specific endorsements in the file from last year. I know that I don't happen to have any, but if you did, you could do the same thing by adding them to the bottom and then sorting it. And then a list of any local qualifications that I might have from the previous file, and I could add those to this list. The next step is to update the second worksheet, which is called List Pivot Tables. These lists are actually populated from the data that I just entered in the worksheet called 1 Enter District Info here. To update this, I do exactly as it says on the screen, remembering that there's red comments that will help you immensely, and there are black or other comment colors that might be helpful tips. I right-click on the blue and click Refresh. And it populates the lists appropriately. The next step is to enter teacher data. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move all of the data from the previous worksheet, the teacher data, into this. However, one quick note, I've added 2 additional columns in this for another cycle of evaluations. So I want to make sure that I only move specific data over. I need to do this in a 2-step process. So to begin, I'll go to last year's file. I'll click on the one called Enter Teacher Data here, and I will highlight, click and hold, and highlight the data that I hope to move over all the way over to and up to, in this case, column BG. I want to stop after column 7, Previous Evaluation Rating, and I'll explain why in 1 second. Then I'm going to highlight all the way down the data that I have available to transition into the new version of the file. Right-click, copy, move to the new file, right-click where I want to paste that data, and click Values. Now remember that I stopped, and there were columns, actually 3 in the previous version of the file that I did not copy over. The reason for that is over to the right, I've added 2 new columns for another evaluation cycle. In the previous version, I had 7 evaluation cycles. In this version, I have 8, so I only wanted to move over all the way up to 7. And then I'm going to do the second part of this process, which is to move past the 8th evaluation cycle, which is columns BH and BI, and then copy and paste the last 3 columns of information. So I go back to the file from last year, highlight the last 3 columns of data, right-click, copy, move to this year's version of the file, right-click where I want to start the paste process, and click Values. Now I have all of the information that's necessary to move forward with using this file. I have created a couple new things in this version of the file. One of them is called Evaluation Cycle. It's a new column. It's optional. You don't have to use it if you choose not to. But several users requested a column where they could identify whether or not a teacher is on cycle or not. So you would just use the drop down and say on, or you could type on in that space, or off if you choose to populate that. Then it helps you filter at the top whether or not someone's on or off cycle. You can drill into the data a little bit more efficiently. The next step in this process is to look at the data check worksheet. As you may recall, this is a worksheet that tells you if you see green, as long as you've entered an IEIN number, that if you see green and the teachers have been placed into a group, then you know that you've entered all the data necessary. I do happen to know I have some data that has not been entered, and now I'll show you what to do when you see that happen. So I'm going to move down to the space where I know that I have data that's not been entered. And you can see on your screen, I have several rows of data that I still need to add information. And I'm going to focus on row 350 as an example. So you can see row 350 on the worksheet called Data Check. It's directly tied to row 350 back on the worksheet called Enter Teacher Data here. So when it says I have missing data and I need to enter the most recent evaluation rating, I can go back to worksheet number 3, find row 350 here, and then I need to go to what it tells me that I'm missing, which happens to be the column called 1, Most Recent Evaluation Rating. I find that I am missing that information, so I click the drop down and I select whatever I need in data. I'll select Proficient. Then I go back to Data Check, look at row 350. Now it's moved to Previous Evaluation Rating. So I go back to row 350, talking about number 2, the previous evaluation rating. So I will select the correct information, and I happen to know that there's other data. You need 3 cycles of evaluations populated. In this case, maybe the teacher was not employed, so I'll select that. If I have additional ratings that I'd like to put in, that is fine, but I at least have to have 3. And then moving to the right, I know that I'm going to be asked to fill out whether or not the committee overrode. So I'm going to select No Override. And then if I happen to go back to Data Check, the next thing it's asking the Joint Agreement Override group. So I'm going to select worksheet number 3. It happens to be column BK. So I select that next and say Not Applicable because there was no override. And then the last piece of data that I need for the program to work correctly is whether or not the person was currently employed or no longer employed. I'll select Currently Employed, and if I choose to, I could select whether that person is on or off cycle. When I go to Data Check now, and I look at row 350, you'll notice that it's been populated correctly. It's turned green in the appropriate spaces, the teacher is placed into a group, and there's information on the page that should resonate with me that I just entered. The next step is to update the reports and to determine what I'd like to do with the reports. The first report is called Merge Data Worksheet. This happens to be a simple display of all the data that's available and has been calculated behind the scenes. This can be used to copy and paste into an external Excel worksheet or to use in a merge process. The next report is for Group 1, and you'll notice that nothing has been populated. To populate the reports, I can right-click on the blue and click Refresh. In this case, what it's done is populated everyone into Group 1, but notice at the top where it says Employment Status, all are being shown. If I click the drop-down arrow, it's including no longer employed and those that are blank. I only want currently employed in my list. So there's my list for that. And I also need to see if I have any Group 1 teachers. So I click Final Group arrow down. I'm going to expand this out. I don't have any Group 1 teachers, so what I'm going to do is deselect all and select the blank, and then OK. So I don't have any teachers, so there's my final Group 1 report. The last thing on this report I need to do is enter the district name. That's important here because then it'll be populated on all the reports. Next thing is similar to Group 1. I just go to Group 2, select Currently Employed, and select the final group. In this case, I know that I have some teachers that fall within Group 2. So there's my Group 2 report. Group 3 report, the same thing. Select Group 3. There's my Group 3 report. Group 4, same thing. And I have Group 4 report. There's a current and other eligible position report. In this report, I'm just going to select Currently Employed. You could leave it with everyone if you care to look at that data, but I just want those that are currently employed. The Teacher Credential Report. And then the last two are the ones that are actually required as part of this process. The Sequence of Honorable Dismissal list. I'm going to just select those that are currently employed. This is the list that would be given to your association president. And then the evaluation ratings list. And just currently employed. And you could do other filtering, by the way, if you choose to. An example would be, I just want to look at those in the current position, if that's the case. But here's the list. Another thing you may note is that there are some spaces that have not been populated. This is really an understanding of pivot tables, but if you would like all of these cells populated instead of skipping, really what it's telling me is all of this information happens to be for the same teacher with this ID or teacher code. So if I wanted that to be populated, I can right-click on the field, go to Field Settings, Layout and Print, and then Repeat Item Labels and click OK. And now it's populated all of that data. Now, after all that's done, and I make sure that all of this worksheet is green or gray, because if they're no longer employed, there will be some gray cells here. So green or gray, once all that's done, then I know that I have a complete file and I can start sharing the information. Or you could go on to podcast number 3, which is going to be an overview of how to use the Microsoft Word notification letter, which is an optional letter. I hope this podcast has been helpful, and again, I encourage you to read the directions and disclaimers page because it's going to give you many helpful tips on how to use this program effectively. Thank you.